The forge was kept lit late into the night. A crafter, filled with spiteful purpose, hammered away like a man possessed. Heating. Holding. Striking. Shaping. Only to quench the singing metal in purified water and begin again. Over and over this process continued, long into the night, with only the radiance of the moon as company. The smith would not be deterred. Their fatigue would have to wait. Even if their body gave out, then their spirit would see this task through to the end. Yet finally, the smith looked upon their creation with pride, only to sharpen its edges to a reflective shine. This black blade, that stood taller than some men, would be a fitting payment indeed. For you see, the smith had begged a lonely knight to avenge a grave injustice that they had been dealt. The knight agreed to this task, but instead of producing coin, the smith would offer their life's work. The sword was finished, as the knight took to this new weapon like a dragon to the sky, and with similar ferocity, brought its newly shaped edge down upon those that had dishonored the smith and everything they stood for. The sun would shine upon justice this day, as the blood of the guilty would baptize this great sword. Darkness began to lick across the glittering edges of this weapon as its new name would be whispered from the abyss. Deathbringer. Welcome back, my friends! Today we will be discussing the origins, history, and practices of various metalworkers across the land. On a world as hostile as ours, this trade is as necessary as it is respected. For it's in the hands of every great warrior, knight, or rifleman that a mighty weapon is found. And who better to fashion these weapons than the crafter we are covering today? Gather around, my friends, as we come together and understand what it means to be a blacksmith. Blacksmithing, or rather the concept of metallurgy, dates back to the first astral era with ease. Before gods and magic, there was fire and metal. In most of the first astral era, weapons were crude, usually made of sharpened wood or splintered stone. Although, in the second half of this era, precious mineral deposits would start to be found, and as usual, with anything new, there's someone who desires to test what it's capable of. This was when the first examples of metalworking were produced, but they were all misshapen and rather brutish. This wouldn't deter the would-be crafters. Over the years, the shape of the first blades came more and more into focus. The metal was made longer, with sharper points to pierce, but with bladed edges to cut. Crossguards were added to defend the wielder's hand, and leather was wrapped around the hilt for a better grip. And then, toward the tail end of the first astral era, the original alloy would be created: bronze. From the durability and flexibility of bronze came the first ever swords that were truly worthy of the name. And thus the time-honored craft of blacksmithing was officially born. This is the premiere of blacksmithing history, but over thousands of years, the craft would spread across the entire world and evolve in many different ways. So for now, let's fast forward in time to the current age and focus on the Blacksmith's Guild, and learn why it was so successful compared to other forges. Thankfully, the art of blacksmithing has survived through every umbral calamity, steadily finding its way into our modern age, but not without consequence. The calamities did indeed take their toll. We've lost entire cultures of smithing techniques time and time again. It's only by the grace of some long-lived entities that we've managed to save some of these ancient skills. But as for the modern era, many of the current smithing techniques within Eorzea can trace their roots back to Limsa Lominsa. Now, it would be incorrect to assume that Limsa was the only city-state to have blacksmiths and masters of metalworking. Every country in Aldenard has one or more forges somewhere, each with their own history, traditions, and crafting methods. However, Limsa would be the country to set the standard and reliably produce talented craftsmen on a regular basis when compared to all others. But there is a good reason for this. Back in the 970s, Limsa would enter into its first official ceasefire with the kobolds of Vilbrand. This was a shaky peace to be sure, but it opened up a series of opportunities that other city-states didn't have access to. The kobolds, being intimately connected to the element of earth and all things associated with it, knew more about the various metals of the land and how to craft with them than any other race. As the peace between Limsa and the kobolds flourished, the beastmen eventually shared some of their smelting and forging secrets. These lessons proved revolutionary to Limsa, as their blacksmiths were now able to craft things like weapons, armor, and ship parts that were both stronger and lighter than anything they made previously. These new smithing techniques opened the door to a whole new world, as the blacksmiths began forging with new metals and alloys that they previously didn't have techniques for. Likewise, the blacksmiths of Limsa always had something to practice on and never wanted for customers. Between the constant infighting, pirate factions, and new military branch created by the Admiral, the blacksmiths of Limsa always had work to do, and as such, they always had time to improve their craft. This caused the craftsmen of this seaside nation to evolve their techniques quickly and efficiently out of necessity. With the teachings of the kobolds and refinement of centuries, the Blacksmith's Guild would officially be created in the year 1429. With the formation of a proper guild, Limsa had a better handle on who did and didn't have the skills necessary to craft what was needed. Becoming a popular member of the Blacksmith's Guild was an easy way to earn a good reputation amongst the various leaders of Limsa, not to mention earning their protection as well. Mostly because you don't want your favorite smith to suddenly disappear or die to a rival pirate crew when said smith is still making your weapons. As such, some of the best blacksmiths in Limsa were fought over, and the crafters themselves sometimes became just as famous as the captains of pirate crews. But as the years went on, piracy was eventually outlawed by Admiral Merlweb Blohisfin, and with her leadership came a new form of peace with the other city-states of Eorzea. Now that Limsa wasn't constantly fighting itself or giving the other nations a hard time, the Blacksmith's Guild became more open and friendly. No longer were they hoarding their smithing secrets or practices. Instead, they began to share what they understood with the other city-states, and by extension, started taking on new apprentices almost every week. With this new approach to mentorship, the popularity of blacksmithing has never been higher. In fact, some crafters across the world have come to Limsa to observe the guild's mastery over metal. Now that you know the origins and history of the Blacksmith's Guild, let's move on to other cultures that have their own notable smithing methods. Ishgard is well known for the quality of weapons produced from its forges. They even discovered a method of infusing dragon blood into precious metals to increase their strength and durability. But this smithing method was abandoned after the end of the Dragonsong War. However, during this new time of peace, old smithing techniques that existed during the original peace between Elezen and Dragon have been reacquired. One of these methods makes use of dragon fire instead of a traditional forge's heat. A dragon's flames are magical in nature, which enchants the metal on an etheric level, making the weapons created from this method uniquely light and powerful at the same time. But interesting blacksmithing methods don't end there. There is also the alchemy-enhanced metals of Radzat Han, making their weapons sometimes take on interesting colors and properties. There is also the unique metal folding methods of Kugane. This style of steel folding would eventually create the first ever katanas, and after arcane enchantment, these swords would become renowned for their cutting potential. There are many more methods across the world, but we'd be here all day if I discussed them all. Lastly, let us address their choice of tools and attire. The most common tool of a blacksmith is a hammer. Or rather, various types of hammers made to strike and shape various metals into more refined forms. The quality of the tool ultimately affects the quality of the weapon, as more often than not, a smith's hammer needs to be more resilient than the weapon it's creating. Their secondary tool is a smith's file. This tool is used to smooth and shape the item with precision that a hammer cannot provide. For example, a file would be used to smooth down a blade, preparing it for the eventual sharpening process. Meanwhile, the hammer was used to form the blade in the first place. Now we discuss their attire. Blacksmiths typically wear thick gloves to protect their hands, goggles to protect their eyes, steel boots to prevent anything heavy from falling down and smashing their feet, as well as a very thick apron to shield their vitals and legs from the crafting process. Though you'll also notice that many blacksmithing outfits have either exposed shoulders or an exposed back. This is because crafting with fire and metal is understandably hot. Very hot. The exposed shoulders and back help to keep the craftsman cool for a longer period, since these body parts aren't supposed to be in the proverbial line of fire. And finally, one of the most important tools to any crafter, crystals. Blacksmiths typically use crystals attuned to the elements of fire and earth. Fire crystals help to heat up metals and accelerate the crafting process faster than traditional fire ever could. Meanwhile, the earth crystals are used to help the blacksmith hammer out any impurities within the metals they're working with. Fire provides the spark of change, while earth grounds the process and keeps it whole. And that, my friends, will be the end of our lesson on modern blacksmithing. Metallurgy has changed drastically over the many astral eras we've endured. Even the Allegan Empire had their own methods that we're still learning more about. But I'm certain that given time, we might very well find new crafting methods that surpass even the pristine Allegan techniques. But until that day comes, I hope to see you in the forges. Mayhaps one day, yours will be the hand that creates the next weapon of unmatched power. And if so, I'd be honored to give it a swing. Till then, keep your eye on quality over quantity, and stay safe, my friends. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Big shout out to my patrons, Rovakis, Monsolo97, Potato, Runatir, The Yellow Couch, Papaya Cyan, Sage Mouse, Valvala Soma, and EB the GT. If you want to see more lore content in the future, share this with your friends. My dream is to share as much as I find with as many people as possible. And if you do end up helping me, thank you so much in advance. And have a wonderful day.